So I'm going to start something. I have never done this before. I'm going to do an experiment. Anything unique about these sunglasses? Anything at all? Standard sunglasses, correct? The camera is right here. The microphones are right here. It's a HD Spy sunglass. $40. I'll leave you with this thought as I get into the presentation and think about when you're having a conversation with an individual and he or she does not know that they're being recorded. And looks pretty innocuous, but it isn't. So let's get going. The smart city is a business, and we're here to build efficiencies, we're here to build economies of scale, and truly do the right thing. But anybody who's been following what's happening in Toronto? So it's the poster child for what a smart city should and should not look like, depending on which side you're coming from. So Quayside is the region that's shaded in red over there. So that's the area within Toronto where the ultimate smart city is being built. And Google, or Alphabet rather, is the brains behind working with the city of Toronto to make it happen. So far, so good. Except there's a problem. Look at the comments below. The citizens weren't taken into confidence in terms of, hey, if I walk the dog at night, is that data being stored? Am I going to be targeted tomorrow with something else? So the point of what is efficiency, what is the consumer actually giving up in exchange for what was never truly discussed. And the importance of this is because there is no precedent for this. If you have elections coming up, or if you have a recall, or if you have a new builder coming up and setting up a new building, the city council and the citizens know what to do. But this is uncharted territory. We have surveillance cameras, we have robots on the street, there is tracking that's happening 24/7. So there isn't a model in terms of, okay, how do we even have a debate? And it's Google behind it, right? So there's a lot of commercial push to kind of making this happen. So I'll just let you dwell on this for a while and take a look at what's happening over there as we get into more specifics. So, and I promise I'm not here to take sides. I'm just here to educate. So why are we in this business to begin with? So every business, doesn't matter whether it's a smart city, doesn't matter whether it's a autonomous car, doesn't matter whether it's agricultural through sensors, there are four forces that every business is dealing with today. Right on top is big data. And we are at the point right now, and this conference is just evidence of that. There is proliferation of sensors, which means there is accumulation of data. Second, regulations. And this is coming hard and fast. We'll get into more specifics, but GDPR, or General Data Protection Regulation, which originated in the European Union but has ramifications worldwide. Also, coming from California, we have this thing called CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act, which is coming into effect very shortly. And then there's the Illinois Biometric Act. So there are lots of regulations that are coming full force. So that's another thing businesses have to be watchful for. The third one is ethics. How many of you have actually heard of ethics being talked in conferences as a subject? No, right? But given everything that's happening around us, doesn't matter whether it's Facebook, whether it's Alexa listening to you, this is a big topic. And it's becoming much, much more front page than it's ever been in the past. The problem is businesses do not know how to deal with ethics because there is no blueprint. If there was a precedent saying, hey, I have a regulation that says you need to do A, B, and C, and then you're compliant, there is no ethical compliance handbook. So we're at the point right now where this is super, super critical, and we'll get into why. And if you ever think about ethics, and just think about this. having a conversation with your best friend and recording them, right thing or wrong thing, right? So ethics is everywhere. And then finally, privacy. Heard of Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and privacy right now? And he's talking about private communications in chat rooms, and that's making front page news. Now, whether or not this is a change in business model for the most front face social platform in the world or not, I do not know. But the fact that privacy is being raised to a level which has never been talked about before is a very, very important theme. And particularly over here, where you talk about what does communications really mean? What does wireless really mean? And we're all about trying to get data to make better predictions to influence outcomes. But at what cost? And are you being transparent? So let's examine each one. So let's start about big data and machine learning, right? I gave you a few examples, but why here, why now? You know this better than I. The cost of sensors is way down. You can put sensors everywhere for marginal cost increases. So plummeting costs. And it's not just about sensors, it's about connectivity. This is the wireless exposition. 5G was all the rage at Mobile World Congress a week ago. So you have ubiquitous connectivity. So sensors, connectivity, and then anybody knows what FOMO is? Fear of missing out. FOMO is a big human behavior, psychological need to stay relevant. Which means if you are not putting sensors and your competitors are, they have more data and you don't. And I've heard this over and over again, which is, what are you going to do with that data? I have no idea. But I'm going to collect the heck out of it, because if I don't, I'm going to miss out. And you cannot overemphasize FOMO, because it's a virtuous cycle is probably the wrong word, but it's a cycle that you get sucked into, and at that point, you're going to continue proliferating that. So remember FOMO. Compute. Again, we're at the point right now where compute costs are plummeting. And it doesn't matter what compute you're talking about. It could be a laptop, could be edge computing, could be Amazon Web Services. Doesn't matter. Wherever you look, you can compute for a fraction of the cost this year than it was last year, and it's going to continue to go down. Ubiquitous access, and this is important. This is different than storage. So storage was I can store anything anywhere. Anybody really cares about when you take a photograph anymore where it's stored? It doesn't matter whether this is 128 gig or 256 gig. It's all connected to Google backend or Dropbox backend. So all of us have unlimited access to storage. But in this case, you're at that point right now for businesses, you literally have unlimited compute. And it's all marginal cost increases. So do you want to compute at the point of collection of data through edge computing? Do you want to move it back up to the cloud and use Amazon Web Services to do that, or Azure or something else? And the last piece is the delivery point, right? Which is, again, like I mentioned, there is a boundaryless compute environment right now. And literally, we've never been in this environment before, where you can pick and choose where and how you want to compute. So storage, compute. The last one, and this is huge, you actually have available software. So the barrier to entry has dramatically dropped. And it used to be, hey, unless you're a Facebook, Google, Twitter, Yahoo, who talks about Yahoo anymore? You didn't have software talent. You didn't have the IP. You didn't have the knowledge. Not so anymore. You have open source. You have models that are available. In fact, IBM has this thing called Fairness 360 open source model. So we remember we're talking about ethics and there's no blueprint. Just look up IBM Fairness 360 open source. They actually have built models to talk about how do you assess whether you have data bias or algorithmic bias to begin with, right? So even if you don't have software smarts, even if you lack the ability to attract the right talent to your organization, you can still start. And this was unheralded, I mean, this is unprecedented, where you have a starting position of available software to make things happen. So software, compute, and storage. So that's the first piece. So privacy, again, Facebook is business to consumer is how we see it, but it's a business to business model. That's how their ad business works. So when Mark stands up over there and starts talking about how Facebook is going down the privacy path of creating private groups and private chat, that's going to have residual effect to the rest of the industry. So let's not ignore that thing. But even if you forget about that, there is a lot of activism that's happening. So Center for Humane Technology is a big nonprofit, and there are big names behind it. So Omidyar, who was the founder of PayPal, is behind it. You have venture capitalists who are, Reid Hoffman is another example, who's associated with that. So the point being, now you have big names that are starting to put ethics, or in this case, the need for privacy front and center. Open Book. So Open Book, again, if you look it up, is a consortium. I think it includes Twitter, Facebook, and Google right now, and there are more being added to that, as to how you can move data from one platform to another. Right? So think of this, portability of information from one platform to another. Now, skeptics will argue, saying, hey, this is just to keep the regulators off their back so that they don't have to pay fines. But regardless, it is gaining momentum in terms of number of people joining this open book movement. So the point being, the idea of privacy is starting to take root. There are big names that are being pushed. And you need to start asking the question, saying, when your customers come to you and say, okay, what are you doing to keep my data private? You need to have an answer. And it's no longer kosher to say, okay, I don't know, or that's AWS's problem, or that's Dropbox problem. It does not work. It's your customer, it's your problem. So when it comes to privacy and software, again, these are examples of how this is being made available to consumers and businesses. So Signal, anybody heard of Signal? It's a fully encrypted person-to-person chat. So people who are paranoid use Signal pretty frequently. TunnelBear. So I use TunnelBear all the time. It's an endpoint VPN connection. And the reason I use TunnelBear is every time somebody says, hey, there's free Wi-Fi for 30 minutes in the convention center, there isn't free Wi-Fi. You're getting access, and you don't know whether the access point is compromised. You don't know whether certificates are still valid. So when things are free, you're giving up something in return. So if you're not paying for something, you are the product. So this TunnelBear is just a VPN connection which says, hey, regardless of where you are, you control that you are encrypting everything that's coming out of your endpoint. Right? So again, from a privacy perspective, there are easy to use controls that are already there. And then FB News Eradicator. So try this just for grins, Facebook News Eradicator. Any big Facebook users over here? There's one. Okay, just try it out. It'll actually change your experience of Facebook. And I mean, I'm not a big Facebook user, but when I tried it out, it actually cleaned out everything. It was almost like I was in this Zen-like moment where I wasn't seeing anything. No one is sharing anything with me. And it gives you perspective as to what kind of social interaction has become second nature to us. So again, it's an idea of, okay, if he were to go into become a hermit for 6 months, and this is the equivalent of that in the digital age. Right? So, exposés. So why is privacy becoming so front and center, even if people choose to avoid it? Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, everybody aware of what happened there, right? So even people who were pretending that data brokering wasn't happening on the back end, you can't ignore that anymore. So it's not between Facebook and you, it's between Facebook and their third-party partners that you have no idea. right? So the awareness level is going up, and it's only going to continue to go up as we have more of these. Alexa, Alexa users, one, okay. Uh, Again, I'm not here to pontificate. Alexa is wonderful. It makes life easy. In fact, I have a friend of mine who actually uses Alexa to compensate for him not being there when he's traveling. So it actually reads out bedtime stories for his kids and puts them to sleep. Now, the thing about Alexa is, again, awareness. So I come from Silicon Valley and I have a lot of tech friends, as you can imagine. And it blows my mind every single time when they come home and they pretend. They become pumpkins when they come home. And they could be working in the top tier venture capital firms or top tier B2B firms when they go to work. And they talk about computing and artificial intelligence and machine learning, all those buzzwords, and they come home and they become pumpkins. Why? Because when something is exposed saying Alexa is listening to you, even if you're not talking to Alexa, oh, really? And so that's the part that bothers me because it's no longer kosher to pretend you don't know. And if this is the condition of people who in the tech world who understand technology, but when they come home, they become stupid consumers. Does not work. Not only are we responsible for being in control of what we do, we have a responsibility, I'm talking about myself too, as a tech person to educate others who are not tech savvy, who don't understand the controls beyond having Alexa or a Siri at home. And again, there's no right or wrong here. There are people who absolutely don't care if Alexa is listening to them, but they are aware that it's listening. That's all that matters. Awareness is critical. Choices and control, absolutely. Each person's upbringing and where what they choose to do is their own responsibility, right? And then I'll give you my own example. And this was World Cup soccer or football, depending on which part of the world you come from. 2016, that was happening in France. So I was up in Vancouver, and this was, I think, Croatia and England. I think it was semis. And so I'm an AT&T Uverse subscriber. Don't ask me why, but for historical reasons, I'm a Uverse subscriber. And I was in Vancouver, and I wanted to see the match. And I was between meetings, and I said, okay, I'm not going to go figure out a place or a bar to watch the match. I have the AT&T Uverse app that I could download. So I have an Android phone, so I went to the Google Play Store, and I downloaded the app. And on the left is what the app demanded of me. Identity, location, photos, Wi-Fi connection, device ID, and call information. Right? I want to see the match, and the app is demanding things that make no sense at all. Right? 99.9% of people on the planet would have said yes, moved on with life, and that app continues to exfiltrate information that it has no reason to. I'm not in that 99.9%. Call me a mad scientist or whatever, right? So, but I wanted to see the match. So I said, okay, let me see this. Let me download the app. And then I went to the right, and I took away all the controls that it asked for. I could not download the app unless I said yes. So I said, fine, okay, so I'll be a pumpkin, and I'll say yes to you. But I went to the control, and I literally, this is the phone, I took away all the controls, and I watched the match. And so the reason I say this is the software programmers use software development kits and APIs that are being made available to them by all of these conglomerates. And by default, everybody is strapped for time, so they go down the default path, which is, hey, ask for all the permissions because that's the default. So again, this is not a blame game over here. This is how the system works. So when the app is created, it's created with defaults, and you and I end up being sucked out of our own information. And then we pretend that how does AT&T know where I'm traveling in the world? Because you turn on location information for the rest of your life. This is not magic. This is not, we don't have the right to pretend that we don't know. We do. So, talking about ethics, why is this, like I mentioned earlier, there is no blueprint for this. There is no regulation that says, hey, thou shalt do this, 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 and you are now an ethical organization. There isn't. So we have to learn as we go along. So the first one, biases in software. So I'll use Microsoft and Google because those are the most public examples. So Microsoft had this chatbot that went on spewing out racial tweets that Microsoft had to pull back. One example. Google ended up identifying two African American men as gorillas. And they had to talk about mea culpa and pull that back. So the point was, both of these large front-facing organizations were able to understand the fact that they had biased data. And in this case, in the case of Google, the computer imagery was again very biased. They had not taken enough African Americans into the data sets, so therefore it came up with a prediction of a gorilla instead of a human being. So ethics is very much now part and parcel of an organization. So how do you react to something like this? Again, you may not have a chatbot like Microsoft or a facial recognition algorithm like Google, but you do have digital assets, and you do have sensors, and you do have software. So there will be snafus. What do you do when something like that happens? The second one is an interesting book called Radical Markets, and this theory is still new, but I've heard it enough number of times where there is an argument that's being made saying you and I are the data custodians of anything that we offer up. Any Netflix users here? Okay. So Netflix is probably one of the most sophisticated tech organizations on the planet. And they use data all the time to create the next hit movie. And they have an unfair advantage. And if you hear about the Steven Spielberg versus Netflix, and there's a reason behind why that tussle is going on. But all things, this is not a fair game because Netflix is able to understand how do they create the next orange is the new black based on what time of day you're watching, how long you're watching, what sorts of serials you binge watch. So they're instrumenting everything. And based on that, they're actually able to predict how consumer behavior is changing and what sorts of themes and what sorts of actors and actresses, what combination would make sense. In the traditional world, when you go see a movie, how the hell does a producer or director know whether the audience liked it or not? Right? So it's a completely different world. When Netflix creates a next hit show versus 20th Century Fox or Columbia, whoever's left in the business, right? But the radical markets piece is a theory which says you and I become custodians of our own data, which means we can start trading our data for a particular price. And again, it's a very new theory, but it's trying to make sure that you don't have this asymmetric information where I put this on and I'm recording and you have no idea. Right? That's the asymmetry. And what this is trying to do is, yes, you're going to say, hey, Ashwin, you're going to record me, that's fine. You got to pay me X dollars an hour. Or you got to give me a cut of all the ad that you're going to do this. Right? Exactly, right? I mean, so it's becoming, so imagine if I start doing this, right? Are you guys going to get spooked? I was like, hey, what the hell is this guy doing?
Well, maybe you can just...
So you can make it more...
Recording and nobody picks attention.
Absolutely, right? That's why the ethics piece comes front and center, which is what is the right thing to do? And there is no precedent for this, right? It used to have a camera and people, the video camera. Remember the Seinfeld episode where Kramer goes and tries to bootleg a movie that just came out? I mean, for me, that's like front and center because it's this big video camera. And if you have that big piece of equipment, people know what you're up to, right? And you have to self-regulate because you look like an idiot going and trying to take a video. But like you're saying, it could be unobtrusive, it could be on your hip, and you could be recording everything, right? So, but that's a consumer. On the business side of the house, it's the same thing. And we'll talk about some examples in the future coming up. And then if you look at the Facebook fiasco is continual. It's not just tied to one or the other, but over a period of time, it's become pretty apparent that their model is really based on extracting data, but also using the back-end data brokering model to be able to sell the data. Right? So the whole thing about ethics comes back to there is no precedent, and therefore the conversation is going to be a difficult one. People don't like to talk about it because, like, hey, what's the right thing to do? It's like, yeah, these are difficult conversations to have. But if you don't have it, and most people don't have the staying prowess of a Facebook, what would your industry and what would your organization be? Talking about examples, right? And let's talk about the last one, Apple Digital Health. So, any big Apple fans here? One. Okay. So I would suggest go take a look at Apple's privacy page. And I say that because it's the most easy to understand. And it makes consumers aware of what Apple is doing and what they can do about it. Right? So there are examples that are starting to show up about how you can communicate information in a manner that is understandable by the end user. And the digital health is just one example of where they want to make sure of how you adjust at night so it actually doesn't intrude in your sleep. But the point being, there is conscious effort being paid to by an iconic company to say that, hey, if you have an iPhone or an iPad or a MacBook, understand that there is an aspect that you have to communicate to the end user, even if they are not willing to listen, because that's the easiest thing to say, oh, the consumers don't care, right? And that's where the ethics comes into play, which is they may not care, but they will care one day, and if they care and they walk out, you're out of luck. Or even if they don't care, it's your job as an organization to make sure that they understand the manner that is consumable by them. And there are examples of this that are coming up, and a few of them are over here. Now, the data transfer project is very similar to OpenBook that I called out earlier, which is really a project that allows you to transfer your data between entity to entity. So Facebook to Microsoft, Microsoft to Google. So literally, you can go and do that. And LinkedIn users here, anybody? A few. Okay. So so LinkedIn has, again, I don't get paid to say this. I just say this because I've exercised all of this myself. Is LinkedIn allows you to go and get access to everything that you've ever posted, liked, commented, shared in a manner that is in a CSV, which is a comma-separated file, which is really an Excel-like equivalent. And I urge you to do that for one reason. It gives you everything that I call your digital exhaust that you've ever left behind. And that's just one social platform. And it's easy to do. Just go to LinkedIn, privacy. It'll say, hey, what do you want to do? I want to get access to my digital information. You put in if you're logged in already, it's just, you hit submit. And they used to give half of it within the first half hour and the rest of it within the first 24 hours, right? And the reason I say this, and I've done it myself, and I urge people to do it, is because it gives you, it's one thing to do a like or a comment on a weekly basis and then week turn to months and years and so forth, but it's another thing to see it all in a consolidated form that can be traded on the back end. So if somebody wants to know how Ashwin used to be a network professional turning into a security engineer, now turning into a tech ethicist and a podcaster, you just have to see how my thinking has changed over many years, and that could easily be a predictive model that could be sold to a third party. Right? So the point of seeing everything that you've ever done in a concise form makes you pause. And that's what it did for me. So again, an example of saying, okay, when you talk about why ethics is so important is because I don't know what LinkedIn's customer base is. I think it's definitely over 200, 300 million users, right? Now imagine they have all of this, not imagine, they have all of this for each of these users. And it's telling a story. And the story is super valuable, and people are willing to pay for it. So technology is also, and again, I talked about this, I'll again just talk about one thing, which is the last one over here, which is becoming extremely relevant, is everybody is a tech business right now, right? I mean, there's no non-tech business. And the example I gave earlier about why the Microsoft chatbot started spewing out racial tweets, or why Google ended up identifying two African American males as gorillas, somebody has to explain that. And if it was a human being that was making a mistake, let's say I did a snafu, right? My boss comes to me and I'm telling her, sorry. She's going to ask me, it's like, hey, why did you do what you did, right? And I could lie, I could say the truth, but it's me speaking. Now you have machines that are making decisions. Why did a Tesla crash? Elon can't answer that question, neither can his organization. There was some software algorithm over there that decided that this path needed to be taken. And there's a lot of machine learning and AI behind it. So the AI explainability comes to the point of saying, okay, are you going to be putting up your ethical framework in place so that if there is a violation of that, you can go back and see why it got violated? And if you don't have that, you're either going to be saying mea culpa for everything, or you're going to be saying, hey, this is a part of the business. Right? So we're at that point right now where machines are starting to make decisions on our behalf, and that's the only way you can scale. But having an ethical framework tells you when they've gone awry, so you can actually pull back. So regulations, I talked about this. GDPR is probably the biggest one. The compliance aspect of it is pretty huge. It's 4% of global revenue, or 20 million euros, whichever is larger. And the CCPA I talked about earlier, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act, which I think is the next one. Yeah, so the point is there is awareness that is rising in terms of these regulations themselves. It's sometimes spooky. I'd actually point you to IoT, which is relevant for this conference, Senate Bill 327, which is again California. And so I'll give you one aspect of this bill which is super interesting, which is one of the reasons IoT devices typically get hacked is because the default password is the same. So imagine I'm a sensor manufacturer and I create, I don't know, millions of devices every month. Password 123, default, and I ship 1 million devices. So if you get hacked into one, or if I figure out that your default is password 123, I can go about and search for your IoT identifier and be able to hack into every single device. So 327, for the first time, does something hugely important from a regulatory perspective, which is makes sure that you do not have the same default password for every device, number one. Number two, as a end user, the first time you power on a device, you have to change it. So you put two controls in place. Now, the reason I call this out is because anybody selling any IoT device in the state of California has to be adhering to this. Otherwise, they're out of compliance. So you're getting into this place where as compliance gets much more common speak and it gets more lifelike in terms of problems it's trying to solve, it is going to touch upon that boundary of, okay, the ethical boundary and the privacy boundary, right? So, but if compliance doesn't go up there, imagine all the other 49 states that may not have something like this. As a business, you can say, you know what, I'm going to ship default password, or I'm not going to do business in California because it's too much of a hassle for me, right? So you have this internal debate, discussion that needs to happen. Again, going back to, hey, what's the right thing to do? And if you have the outcome in mind, which is I want to create a secure environment for my end user, adhering to compliance becomes a byproduct versus, hey, what's the cost of non-compliance? right? So there are two different ways of looking at the same problem. Um, so in terms of awareness, I mentioned Apple before, but the plain speak regulations is really something that people are starting to ask questions about. So the Apple is just the first example. LinkedIn also, I mean, to be fair, has a reasonably straightforward privacy FAQ. In B2B situations, it gets a lot more complicated. Or a partner to business conversation, which is, hey, what is a regulatory environment that we are operating in? For example, if you are operating on Amazon Web Services AWS and a data breach happens, I guarantee you most non-tech users have no idea what's the liability of AWS versus them. Right? So the point of the regulations only take you so far, but the ability to actually understand where the dividing line is in terms of responsibility, especially in an environment where you are dealing with third-party software, third-party compute, third-party storage that we talked about earlier, right? So having an awareness of where things are going, and the regulations are pushing the way, but only in certain areas. There are lots of industries where regulations are far, far behind. And the last piece about mind shift from just ticking the box, and again, there is a demographic aspect of this that I got introduced to very recently, and it's something that's been like top of mind for me, is the buyer persona. So there was a survey that was done saying if you're 37 or below and you have a customer service issue, you want to talk to a chatbot. You do not want to talk to a human being. If you're 37 and above and you have a customer service issue, you want to freaking talk to a human being. You don't want to talk to a chatbot. So it's a simple question of saying, okay, do we invest in a chatbot or don't we invest in a chatbot? But the bigger question is, who am I serving? Who's the end buyer? What's their demographic look like? So a lot of these things is getting to a point right now where the technology is an enabler, but understanding who the personas on the other side allows you to make choices. And it is going to get complicated because you have a human being versus a chat. Do they talk the same language? How do you store the data? If the chat, again, doesn't become a Microsoft issue where it starts going crazy and you have to explain why it did what it did. But if you don't do that, then you're actually underserving a community if you have a buyer who's under 37 and he or she is faced with talking to a human and they're like, I'm done, right? Or the other way around. So the mind shifting from ticking the box is really people are getting into a mindset of, okay, and my own AD&D example of saying, okay, I want to watch the match. So I don't give a shit about what I'm giving up, and then wake up the next day and say, hey, what the hell happened here? Right? So ultimately, you are going to have this cognitive dissonance that you have to be worried about. Because I don't think anybody in the right mind would wake up and say, okay, my life is an open book and keep at it. Right? There'll be varying degrees of control that people want to exercise at every point in time. And as an organization, you have to be watchful for that. It's no longer kosher to say, okay, my consumer does not care. What if they care tomorrow? What can you do about it? And those are the questions that need to get answered. So, again, quantification aside, I mean, it's the ethical evolution and engagement and empowerment is key, right? So I'll go through this pretty quickly, which is you have to adopt and evangelize. And this is important, which is this is a cultural shift. And what Facebook is going through is exactly that. I mean, you're seeing in front page news as to what Facebook was 2 years ago, where it is now, where it's headed, right? And it's an example of evolution. Now, have they wholeheartedly embraced this? I don't know, but it's going through an evolution. And again, we talked about this. What's the right thing to do? Now, I've been in the security industry for 20 years. Not once have I ever had this conversation. I've been in startups and large companies, small companies. We don't talk about this. What's the right thing to do? But if you don't, and things go south, that's the worst thing or the worst time to have that discussion. Um, Now, I mentioned the chatbot as an example, but it is changing. And this is sometimes spooky for people, right? Which is what was okay yesterday may not be okay today. So, to understand the fact that, hey, maybe yesterday it was okay to collect data and not tell people, but now with these revelations that have happened, we have to be more open, right? And that puts stress on an organization. Right? Imagine you used to have these once a year audit reviews, and people used to, oh man, I need to go into a room, talk to these auditors. Can I come back and go back to business? Unfortunately, ethics doesn't fall into that yearly cadence. The and this is again, people pretend that they listen to their customer, but the point being, okay, you just don't engage with customers for them when they sign a EULA, end user license agreement, or when things go wrong through customer support. Right? This thing about the demographics and chatbots below 37 and above, I mean, those are indicators of, okay, how do I engage with my customers deeper? Right? Some of the answers maybe you need to change your definition of your product. You need to have more diversity in your organization so that you can address that. So there's lots and lots of ways to skin this. So the question of control, how much control do I give an end customer? And the examples that I gave earlier about open book or data transfer project, these are actually controls you're giving to the end customer. I mean, GDPR has this most famous thing called right to be forgotten, which means I can hit forget, and every single digital trail ever left behind has to be gone like this. Right? That's an example of control. And it's not easy because, I mean, if it's anonymized data, then what happens? If it's backed up 3 times in 3 different regions, how do I delete it? So it comes back to truly asking the right sets of questions to be able to make the decisions. I know lots of organizations who are like, oh yeah, GDPR, we'll deal with that, or let somebody else get fined and then we'll worry about it. And there are forward-looking organizations who are saying, you know what, every customer of mine is an EU citizen, and I'm going to treat them the same way. So different ways of looking at it. So what can a business do? Ultimately, you look at it and say, okay, there are 4 things, and I don't care which industry, these 4 things are common. The first one is data weaponization. And I'd urge you to ask these questions because these are super, super critical questions. First one is, how much data do I collect? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. FOMO should not be driving behavior, fear of missing out. Number 2, what insights and predictions am I getting out of that? Third question, I'm going to put this back on. What am I doing to take advantage of the asymmetrical relationship? This is an asymmetrical relationship. I turn on recording over here, you don't even know, and I'm recording. That's asymmetry. If I tell you, you are being recorded, that's symmetric. And the last one, can I shred? If people say, get rid of my data, do you have a way to hit the shred button? Okay? User control. Can I stop sharing my data? First one. Is it easy for, doesn't matter if it's B2C or B2B, can I stop sharing my data? Second, do you have a meter which says, okay, I can share my data as long as you're not tracking my location, as long as you're not tracking my IP address, the rest of it is fine. Third, and this is an interesting one, which is, I don't know whether I got penalized by AT&T because I used the AT&T Iwce app and I turned off all tracking. I don't know. Maybe you're throttling my AT&T Iwce at home. I have no freaking idea. So do you penalize end users for not sharing? And the fourth one and this is where we're getting to right now, you hear more and more about this, which is, are you paying me for me to share my data? Like I hail from India, right? So in India, we have this thing called Ola, which is a big Uber competitor. And so Ola is all about incentivizing people, right? And I know lots of people, friends of mine are saying, what, I don't give a shit about tracking. If they take 50 rupees off my ride, they can track me all day long. So that's a choice. That's a choice you're offering depending on demographics, depending on the acceptance, the incentive for them to share the data. This gets into the murky space of data brokering. Who do I share the insights with? It's one thing for Facebook and me to communicate, and I'm sharing information with Facebook, and Facebook is targeting ads at me. I mean, that's, even though it's spooky, I can at least see that. I don't see a Cambridge Analytica. I have no idea who CA is. Now they're out of business, thank God. But who else is out there that this data is being shared with, right? I have no idea. Do I understand the third party's privacy policies? And this is murky territory. So imagine you're a consumer, and every time you use Facebook, you get these 10 different accept, because your data is being shared with 10 third party providers on the back end. You are not going to be happy. I'm not going to be happy as a Facebook consumer to see that. So what's the right thing to do? But keeping consumers aware, yet not overwhelming them with information. Can I audit and revoke on demand? And this is my experiment with LinkedIn. I audit them every once in a while. I see what I've left behind. And if I'm sharing too much, it's a yellow signal for me to saying maybe I should revoke some of it. And the last one is there a data sharing policy? And this is what I talk about Apple, because there is a very straightforward data sharing policy that's easy to understand. Transparency. First one, terms and conditions. Are they decipherable? And again, I give kudos to Apple because with the iTunes, they have a shorter version and a detailed version. So a shorter version takes maybe about 2 minutes to read. Detailed version is about 80 pages long. Right? I don't know if anybody's ever read them, even the most lawyers speak. Right. So the second is my customer aware? And this is important. Is the customer aware of what data is being collected and why? Third piece is, do I give them an option to opt out? And we talked about the penalties of opting out, but this is the question. And then the participation piece, which is, can I actually get them, make them aware of what's going on, give them an incentive to share? I give you this Netflix example, right? Which is, I was in the $9.99 plan for the longest time. And one day I decided to go and check, hey, is there a cheaper plan? And there was a $7.99 plan, which was, I think, not HD, but only single device streaming. We have never ever streamed to two devices ever as Netflix users. And Netflix knows that. And they still continue to sell me the $9.99 plan. All it would have taken is one email from them saying, hey, we have this $7.99 plan, which is probably more appropriate for your viewing habits. Are you okay with that? I would have been their biggest spokesperson for life. Again, going back to ethics, I mean, this is a continuum. You can actually start doing the right thing, and you can actually end getting more customers that will become your unpaid spokespersons for life. But it takes courage, it takes a moral authority to go ahead and make that call. So ultimately, I'm going to stop over here, which is the first thing is let's stop playing victim. As consumers, we have no right to do this. If you have 20 apps in your phone and you haven't used 19 apps in 3 months, stop playing victim. If you have Alexa at home and your neighbor comes over and you and she have a conversation and Alexa records the conversation, did you inform your neighbor? Right, so the point is, awareness is critical. I mean, we cannot be pumpkins anymore and have all these devices at home, as an example, and IoT is just proliferation of the same, and pretend that we do not know. And I'll just stop here, which is examples. Again, I'm here not just to pontificate, but give ways to empower, right? VPN. Like I said, for those of you who came in late, there is no such thing as free Wi-Fi. Free Wi-Fi is you're the product and your data is being sucked and you have no idea what the security implications are. So use a endpoint VPN so you can actually control that your connection is encrypted. Secure messaging. Again, this is some people think that the messaging ought to be secure. I mean, I'm not one of them, which is I use regular MMS and SMS, but I make sure I don't send anything that's of value that if it gets hacked, I'm okay with that. Right? So again, there are levels. The third one, how many of you have heard of this search engine called DuckDuckGo? Okay, 1, 2. So DuckDuckGo, just go take a look at it. And it's just a choice. Because if you're logged into Gmail, if you're logged into YouTube and you go and do a Google search, you are being triangulated. They know who you are, they know what movies you're watching, they know your email, and now you're searching, so you're giving more data. DuckDuckGo was founded on the principle of no tracking. Everything is anonymous. All searches are anonymous. And it's a fun experiment I do once in a while, where I search for a keyword on Google and I search for a keyword on DuckDuckGo, and it's startling. It is startling. Because Google is all about, okay, what has Ashwin been doing for the last year, 2 years, 10 years? And it's all based on that. DuckDuckGo, what everybody sees is what I see. Awareness. Encrypted DNS, again, DNS domain name service, which is what converts your URL to an IP address, is an option to actually use encrypted DNS. Even that communication is encrypted, straightforward to use. Privacy browser. Anybody heard of Brave browser? B-R-A-V-E. Okay, so I have a fellow privacy czar over here. So the point is, again, Brave is a pain to use, but it's wonderful. I'll tell you why it's a pain to use, because most websites do not work. And I have to go and turn on scripts because JavaScript is so proliferation, is all over, right? But it makes you aware. And again, these are all different degrees of privacy, convenience, and opt-in that you have choices. And there is no right or wrong. But my assertion is just be aware of what you are doing, and then you cannot play victim. That's the only thing over here. And Brave is a pain to use because by default it turns off all third-party cookies, but default it turns off all scripts. So most websites don't work. And I have to physically go and turn on scripting, and the website reloads again. But think of me as in the point not 1% of privacy-minded folks, right? For the others, maybe you're okay with Mozilla, maybe you're okay with Safari, maybe you're okay with Firefox. That's a choice you're making. But you're also giving up something in return. Maybe tracking information, maybe other things, depending on who you are, right? And the last one is exercise your rights. And again, LinkedIn users over here, please go and exercise your LinkedIn right to portability. It's easy to use. It'll give you something in a CSV form. It'll shock you in terms of how much you've left behind if you're an active LinkedIn user. You can do the same thing with Facebook. You can do the same thing with Google. Pick any one. Just do it. And the only thing it does is raises awareness. Now, you may not change your behavior at all because you say, that's fine. I mean, I'm getting better ads. I'm able to make better purchase decisions. Google knows where I want to go for lunch because that's where I've been going every Friday for the last 2 years. That's great. That's an opt-in. No problem at all with that. Right? So I'm not here representing ACLU and talking about what surveillance state we're getting into. No, that's not the point. The point is make choices, be aware, and let others who are not aware of what's going on, make them aware as well. So that's all I'm saying over here. So I'll shut up. Was this useful? Okay. Thanks.